Following this special eyewitness news report on the farm crisis and the Reno plane crash.
In Reno, Nevada today, all but 3 on board lose their lives. At the state capitol here in Minnesota, thousands of farmers rally to fight for their livelihoods. We'll have a full report on the farm crisis that triggered the rally, including a statewide survey on whether Minnesotans really are concerned about farm problems. From sea to shining sea. Good evening, everyone. We will have more on the farm story later in this special extra edition of Eyewitness News, but let's begin it with where we left off, reliving the last few tragic hours of Galaxy Flight 203.
All right, Cindy, it's nearly 20 hours since Flight 203 went down in a ball of flame in Reno, Nevada, and with time, we have been able to piece some things together. We know that at least 69 people, most of them Minnesotans, were killed when the plane crashed shortly after takeoff, about 5 a.m. Minneapolis time. We know the plane was headed for Twin Cities International Airport, with passengers returning from a gambling weekend at Lake Tahoe. We know that there are 3 survivors, a father and son from St. Paul and a teacher from Plymouth. And we know that the plane was a Lockheed Electra, a turboprop with a background of problems and a history of tragedies.
But even hours after it happened, there's too much we don't know. Namely, why did it happen and who was involved? We'll try to get some answers. Let's return to Reno live via News Star 5 to the actual scene of the crash and to our reporters Dave Andrews and John Altenberg. Dave?
Cindy, here at the scene of the crash about 2 miles south of the Reno International Airport, the crash scene has been cordoned off tonight. It is secure, but there are still some 30 or 35 bodies that remain inside the charred wreckage. The work crews, the emergency crews, have called off the search for more bodies until tomorrow morning. They will work when the daylight arrives. Reno area emergency crews spent all day today trying to recover the bodies of the victims from the charred wreckage. As of late this afternoon, fewer than half of the bodies of the 69 fatalities had been recovered. Most were burned beyond recognition, and local authorities say it will take the use of dental charts to make positive identifications of many.
Those that I have personally seen are going to take technical assistance to identify. I would urge any family members present in the Reno area not to request to come to the crash site, nor to go down and view the remains as we remove them. It is simply not a pretty sight, and it's something that should be done by professionals and those that have been trained and properly oriented to that type of task.
Seconds before the crash, the pilot radioed that the plane was vibrating and he was going to return to Reno Airport. Investigators have not recovered the flight recorders that may provide clues about the cause of the crash.
No, it has not, and we have National Transportation Safety Board people with our teams, and they tell us that black box, both the voice recorder and the instrumentation recorder, should be approximately 6 to 8 feet from where the tail section was, or forward of that tail section, and it'll be sometime tomorrow before we get to that area of the fuselage proper.
Now, even though 69 people have died in this tragedy, 3 people somehow have miraculously survived. John Altenburn is here now in Reno with us today. John, you've been covering with some of the families, the relatives of at least 2 of those victims.
Right, Dave. We've been following the story of the Lamson family of St. Paul. This morning, Adrienne Lamson received word that her husband, George Sr., and her son, George Jr., had both survived the crash. She immediately hopped on a plane this morning. We followed her out here to Reno. George Sr. tonight is reported in critical condition with serious burns and many fractures. George Jr. is doing considerably better. He's in another hospital in stable condition tonight. He's a St. Paul high school student. We came out to Reno today with Mrs. Lamson, but ever since we've been unable to talk with her. The hospital has been keeping the family under very close wraps. Tonight, hospital spokesman did have a briefing for reporters, saying the family is very upset. They did release a photo, however, of Mrs. Lamson at her son's bedside. And he is, again, in stable condition.
She has been here. She has met with her son, and she's very distraught about what's going on now. It's now that she's here and she is seeing the physical effects of the plane crash and what's happened to her son, and soon to see what's happened to her husband. She's very concerned and is just emotionally drained right now.
Now, Mrs. Lamson was asked today if she felt lucky having 2 of her family members among the survivors. Her face showed that it probably wasn't feeling very lucky, and also a lot of sorrow for the other people who did die. Again, she had two of the three survivors of this crash. There's one other survivor, Dave, a fellow named Robert Miggins. We believe he's from Plymouth, and he's in a Las Vegas hospital burn center tonight. I understand he's in very critical condition.
He has burns over 80% of his body, as we were told today.
That's right.
The scene here, we were able to tour the scene of the crash, which is about 100 yards or so behind us right now. Authorities brought us to the scene this afternoon. Grim is the only word that describes it. The plane itself has all but disintegrated. It's just a charred hulk. And as we said, unfortunately, inside that hulk right now, there are still 30 to 35 bodies that the emergency crews have not been able to recover. It's a tragedy, without a doubt.
John or Dave, what have you been able to learn about the condition, the status of this particular plane in the recent past, the last few days? Do you know if there were any problems with it? Had it been grounded recently? What can you tell us?
It had been grounded back in May of 1984. It was the plane that the Reverend Jesse Jackson used during part of his campaign for the presidency. And after one of the flights there, the Secret Service, after there was some problems with it, the passengers on board said it wasn't acting properly. The Secret Service ordered an inspection. It was inspected. It was put back into service. Now, this type of aircraft, in the last 7 months, there have been 2 fatal plane crashes of the very same type of aircraft in the United States. That is what the federal investigators from the National Transportation Safety Board, of course, will be looking in as part of their investigation. Too soon now to say what the cause is, although there were reports from the pilot to the control tower seconds before the crash that he was experiencing vibration in the plane. What that vibration was caused by is only speculation at this point.
Dave, George Lamson Jr. was able to provide one of the few descriptions that investigators have so far of what happened. He said he told the hospital spokesman that he remembers getting on the plane, being strapped into a seat. The plane took off, and it suddenly veered. And after that, he said that everyone in the plane knew they were going to crash. There was no mistake. The plane was going down. And from then on, of course, he said he doesn't remember much after the crash. He was apparently thrown clear. So John, one of the few descriptions. Yes.
I know you've been following, too, the families of the victims. Have some of the families of the people that we know have died also started arriving? There was a service here that was being provided by one of the airlines to carry some of those people out there. What do you know about that at this point?
We understand some of those people are coming tomorrow. I believe a great number of them are coming tomorrow. That's the word here tonight.
Mm-hmm. We have seen no one here from the Twin Cities relatives of any of the possible victims of this crash. We have not been able to see anyone physically here. We don't know if any of some probably have arrived today, but most, as we've indicated, will probably be coming down tomorrow.
Dave, does it appear the pilot did actually divert the plane away from a residential area, from apartments?
Well, Stan, we saw the crash site, and one can only speculate. The plane hit way out in the middle of a field, and it skidded for about, I would say, a good 150 or 200 yards before it came to a stop. It landed at first in a very open space. He just may have, one can only speculate.
Indeed.
Okay, thank you to the both of you. On to the people, more of the people involved in this. Of course, following the news of the crash this morning, hundreds waited by the phones at home. Many drove out to Hubert Humphrey International Charter Terminal, hoping to find out if their loved ones were alive. And as Debbie Emblem reports, the day for worried friends and families was an endless nightmare.
I don't want to talk anymore, okay?
Yeah.
If you guys can do something, why don't you go and see if you can't help us get some spokesmen from the company to see if they can't start working with all these people here that have had this tragedy.
It was the cry of many worried Minnesotans who came to the charter terminal today. Most were handed a phone number to call and told they'll have to wait. And no one from Galaxy was there to greet the distraught people. A representative from Page, who knew almost nothing about the Galaxy Charter Company, was left to try to deal with the many questions.
We have been in contact with Galaxy Airlines, and they've informed us that the only information that can be released will have to be released from the FAA, and they have not given us a time when that will be.
No, they're not letting us know anything until they reach my family, my mother and their children.
Is she from here?
No, we're from Ortonville, Minnesota.
We have been in contact with Galaxy Airlines and have been informed that they are selecting a representative to send to Minneapolis.
You know, we know 99.9% sure that my parents were on the flight and, you know, were killed in the wreckage.
We since have been in contact with Galaxy, and they are not sending a representative to Minneapolis.
A chaplain from a Minneapolis hospital was called in to try to support those who waited, and the list of people thought dead in the crash grew. Many finally gave up and left for home. John Fergali will leave St. Paul tomorrow for Reno to try to identify his two brothers, 49-year-old Louie and 42-year-old Sam. They went on the gambling junket with Sam's girlfriend, Kay Meyer. Only those three knew of the surprise they had planned.
Well, Sam and Louie went with Kay, and Sam and Kay got married, and Louie stood up for them, and they were on the junket, and they went to the bowl game.
But instead of a surprise marriage announcement, the Fergali family and friends heard the announcement that Sam Fergali and his new bride may have been killed. In St. Paul, patrons of Minnesota Billiards shot pool, not knowing the hall's owner, Danny Witt, was also certainly dead in Reno. Witt's father, Ronald, wonders what next. He is dying of cancer and buried his sister earlier this week. He's understandably fatalistic.
The fact that I know I have a terminal disease and I've adjusted myself to death. To me, death isn't that important anymore, regardless of who it occurs in. If it's myself, if it's a near member of my family, naturally I have some grief about it, but everybody dies.
There are many unanswered questions running through their minds. How and why did the plane crash? And with a history of serious problems, was the plane properly maintained? It may take 2 to 3 days before answers are known. Not long enough for grieving family and friends. Debbie Ann Bloom, Channel 5 Eyewitness News at the Hubert H. Humphrey International Charter Terminal.
And the second-in-command at the University of Minnesota Athletic Department is also believed to have perished on Galaxy Flight 203. 55-year-old Bob Geary and his wife Kathleen were booked on that fateful flight from Reno. Geary was the Associate Athletic Director and Liaison for Big Ten Sports at the university. Geary came to the U as a ticket director in 1968. He was named Assistant Director of Athletics in 1972 and Associate Director under Paul Giel in 1977. Geary is survived by 2 daughters from 2 previous marriages. One daughter lives in the Twin Cities, the other is in Florida. And the tragedy reaches into Wilmer. Came from that town about 90 miles to the west of the Twin Cities.
Tonight, Carolyn Bruchter reports live via our exclusive News Star 5 from Wilmer. Carolyn?
Thank you very much, Cindy. As you may imagine, this town is saddened and shocked by the news of today. It's all from one family that many of these victims come from. 57-year-old Warren Smith and his wife, 53-year-old Betty, were aboard that plane. Also believed aboard the same plane were the Smith's daughter, 36-year-old Sherry, and her husband, 36-year-old Steve Fuker. All of the victims are well known in this community. Warren Smith had owned and operated the Smith Truck Brokerage here for some 35 years. Tonight, workers were still in a state of disbelief. They were asked not to talk to reporters about Smith since the family had not been officially notified. Steve Fuker, Smith's son-in-law, had just become the food and beverage manager here at the Candioti Entertainment Center. Jeff Lom was his friend and also worked with him and said he will be sorely missed here.
He's a real nice guy, considerate. He was a very hard worker, and I don't know, can't say enough about him. We're all going to miss him. Learned an awful lot from him. It's going to be strange without him. We're just all kind of in a daze right now. Just don't think that that kind of thing can happen.
One ironic footnote here, Steve Fuker, as we said, is the food and beverage manager here. Tonight, Wilmer residents came out to see the Minnesota Twins. This is one of their stops on their promotional tour in the state. Steve Fuker had worked very hard to coordinate all of the efforts here for that event tonight. Of course, people were saddened. They did enjoy the event, but they also remembered their good friend was not here. Back to you in the studio.
Carolyn, you mentioned one of the problems is that nobody has been officially notified yet, and I would imagine, for example, those people in Wilmer cannot actually face the truth until they hear it somehow officially.
Of course, that is the case. We did early today try to talk with the family, and that was the case then. They had not been notified. We tried to talk with workers. Again, they wanted to respect the family's wishes until they know officially that something has happened to them, that they were actually aboard that plane. They want to hold on to all the hope they can.
And out in Wilmer, no official word yet.
And probably no manifest,
not that we know of.
Manifest till tomorrow, probably, at the earliest.
Exactly.
Well, while those relatives and friends are anxiously awaiting word, Washoe County Sheriff's deputies in Nevada and the coroner's office in Nevada are still trying to identify the remains of the passengers on Galaxy Flight 203. The names of those involved, as Stan just said, as we've said before, will not be released until tomorrow at the earliest. The FBI is compiling dental records from the names on the flight manifest for identification purposes. And Washoe County officials called the Hennepin County Coroner's Office earlier today for help in locating family doctors of the victims. But Hennepin County says it has not yet heard back from Reno. Stan?
All right, Cindy, there are important questions about that plane that crashed in Reno. We touched on some of these just a couple of minutes ago, talking with Dave Andrews and John Altenberg. The plane, as we say, a Lockheed Electric Cargo. It's a plane with a long and sometimes tragic past. It first came into use more than 25 years ago, but quickly had problems. 2 crashes, one in Texas, the other in Indiana, claimed 97 lives. Vibrations caused parts of the wings to fall off. That problem was fixed, but recently 2 electric cargo crashes claimed 7 lives. One crash was in Pennsylvania last May. The other in Kansas City, that one less than 2 weeks ago. The plane gained some notoriety last summer when one carrying the Reverend Jesse Jackson went into a dive during a thunderstorm. Jackson made light of the problem, but journalists refused to fly on the plane after that. It turns out that it was Jackson's former campaign plane, the very same one that carried those Minnesotans to their deaths in Reno. Cindy?
Charters to Nevada like the one that crashed today are common among Minnesotans. In fact, more Minnesotans fly to Las Vegas than to any other city. Jason Davis has more.
They call them junkets, and there are any number of them available from promoters, agents, and airlines. They run to all the gambling cities in the United States and the Caribbean islands. The fateful flight this morning was the tragic end of a junket. The tab was only $120 a head. That was for transportation, accommodation, food, and drink. The catch, if there is one, is that you had to be prepared to gamble at least $1,500. The man who organized this weekend's junket was Hy Thayer, a Minneapolis businessman well known in the trade.
I'm familiar with the gentleman who operates this particular Hy Thayer, who operates a junket program out to Atlantic City and occasionally to one of the other islands down in the Caribbean, as well as Las Vegas.
Bob Hawkinson said he recognized many names among the victims of the crash. They often went on gambling junkets. But others he knew, for one reason or another, missed Galaxy Flight 203.
I've had quite a few calls today, and I've heard stories of people who would, one gentleman who missed the flight, he was 5 minutes late and didn't go. Another gentleman who I know personally decided to fly out. When he went on the charter, he decided he didn't want to come back, so he flew to Vegas for this week. So he missed that flight. And a neighbor of mine was going to go on the flight. And on Thursday, he decided not to because he just felt it was just bad timing after Christmas money-wise. He decided not to go.
Bob Hawkinson said he doesn't expect today's crash to have much effect on the junket business to anywhere there's gambling. Jason Davis, Channel 5 Eyewitness News in Minneapolis.
For reasons unknown, some of those scheduled to fly last night from Reno never got on board that plane. In Bloomington, Doug and Bev Abelan had a change of heart, change of mind, and canceled their flight at the last minute. For 20 minutes or more, their 14-year-old son, Russ, was wondering if his parents were dead or alive. Fortunately, he got a call from his father within the half hour. Because Bev Abelan was feeling too tired to fly last night, the couple booked a later flight on Republic Airlines, only to be greeted by a mob of cameramen and reporters.
I guess the net of the whole situation is how the families of our friends must feel. There are no words that can express that.
Think somebody was looking out for you last night?
Yes, I do. And it just proves very firmly in my mind that there's a higher power.
Well, one person who had a change of heart in going on the trip in the first place is one very well-known Minnesotan, Bob Lertzema, who joins us live now in our studio. Bob, first of all, what changed your mind about this trip?
You were booked on the flight, Bob.
Right. I was originally booked on it because what happens during Super Bowl week, a lot of people don't realize this, is that whether it's in Atlantic City or Reno or even Las Vegas, they have Super Bowl weekends, and where they bring in ex-ball players who have actually played in a Super Bowl, and they'll entertain the VIP type personnel there, and they'll fly them in from all over the country, and we'll have a big Super Bowl party on Saturday night, and then they'll take private jets, some that seat maybe 15, 20 people, and they'll fly directly to the Super Bowl, furnish them with tickets, and then after the game, of course, fly them directly back to whatever casino that they originally started from.
You know some of the people who are on board here because you've gone on with them in other junkets. What are they like? What kind of people were we looking at?
They're really, really neat people, and I do want to give my deepest sympathy for those people that lost their loved ones, because they're such a fun group of people, and I've gone to Atlantic City with them on 2 different occasions. I know about 20 of the people that were on the flights, And it's just something, the energy and the love of life that they had, and sometimes it's very sad to see people like that to have to perish this way.
Bob, anything about this charter service or that particular type of aircraft prior to today that bothered you? Had you flown this charter service before or in that particular type of aircraft?
Not on a Galaxy. Before, when we've flown with High Thayer, it's always been like a 707 type of aircraft. And never have I known him to go prop like this.
Was he on board, by the way? Was he scheduled to be on board that trip, High Thayer?
He was there, and apparently he was there, and he saw everybody aboard the plane, and then somebody was supposed to meet him there with some money, and they didn't show up, so he grabbed the limo and went back to Caesars in Tahoe, so he was not on the flight.
All right. Thanks, Bob, very much.
Well, we'll go back live to Reno for more on the crash a little bit later in this special program, but when we return, we'll bring you our special coverage of today's farm.